fled from Absalom his son. O Lord, how many are my foes? Many are rising against me. Many are saying of my soul, there is no salvation for him in God. Selah. But you, O Lord, are a shield about me, my glory and the lifter of my head. I cried aloud to the Lord, and he answered me from his holy hill. Selah. I lay down and slept. I woke again, for the Lord sustained me. I will not be afraid of many thousands of people who have set themselves against me round about. Arise, O Lord, save me, O my God, for you strike all my enemies on the cheek, you break the teeth of the wicked. Salvation belongs to the Lord. Your blessing be on your people. Selah.
Lord, I just want to thank you for this opportunity to be with you and to be with your people. And I want to thank you for this man, Lord. I've served with him for a long time. I know much about this man's heart. And I want to thank you for who he is. And I pray, Lord, that you will speak through him today, Lord. And I pray that you give us hearts prepared to hear what you have to say. And I just pray that you would cause your spirit to go out, Lord. And I pray that you would be glorified in this place today, Lord. We are here for the purpose of bringing glory to your name. And so I pray that you would cause that to happen, Lord, and that you would bless him, that you would carry every word, and that you would keep anything that is not of you from his mouth, and that your word will go out. In Jesus' name we appreciate you and we pray these things. Amen.
Is it on? There we are. Y'all heard me. Good. All right. Hey, good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Awesome. Well, hey, as we get closer to Thanksgiving, I'm sure that it gets a little crazier around your house or wherever you may be going. So appreciate you guys taking time this morning, coming out. But this morning, last week, we wrapped up 1 Peter, as just talked about how we walk in the presence of the Lord. And now we're going to be going into a new place for the next 16 weeks. We're actually going to be diving into the Psalms, okay? And dude, I'm so excited for our church to be really talking and walking out our relationship with the Lord, not only as individuals, but as a body, that we come and just approach the throne of the Lord's grace. And we all come from different walks of life, right? Different experiences, different trials, different even perspectives on who the Lord is. And I think this would be really great for us to just line up where the Lord is taking us, and you specifically. And so I know Johnny prayed for me specifically, and I'm very thankful for that, but I'd love to just take a moment in prayer and just ask the Lord would be present this morning, and that he would just soften our hearts. As I think that's just the best place to start, right? So let's pray. Heavenly Father, I thank you so much for everyone that's here. Pray, Father, that they, whoever's walking through these doors this morning and sitting down, God, that you have a message for them. And it may be different. It may look totally different for them than it is for me, Father, but we know you are good. We pray, Lord, that your words, your truths would just continue to carry us throughout this week. As we know, sometimes this period of time, this season, can bring about a lot of pain, a lot of hurt, good things, joy, Lord. We know you're present in all of it. So we thank you for it. We pray that as a church we would be strengthened and encouraged to carry out your good news. We love you. Amen. All right, if you don't have one already, you should grab a Bible. You should get that in your hands, because we're definitely going to be in the Word a little bit this morning. So raise your hand if you need a Bible. Someone can grab you one off the communion tables and everywhere else. But just to give you a little background, right? So for 16 weeks, we're going to be going through Psalms. So we're not going to be going through each Psalm, because there's 150 chapters, and that would be an eternity, right? And so basically every week we'll be going basically by tens. The person that's speaking will be going, 1 through 9, 10 through 19, so on and so forth. And so what we're going to encourage you to do as a body is actually to read 10 Psalms a week, okay? Now that's not, ideal wish we had 7 days and there's 7 Psalms, but we can all pick that up, because some are short, some are long. But we want everybody to just have their eyes and focus on these Psalms. And Psalms actually stands for a few different things. Not everyone agrees on the terminology of song, but basically it's either a sacred song, a worshipful or praise-worthy kind of word, or a hymn, right? So that's where we get that word hymnal, hymns come from, is a praise to the Lord. And that's not always joyous praise, it's bringing things before the Lord. And so that, just so you know, that's what Psalms come from. And historically speaking, all these Psalms were written from the time of Moses all the way to the time of exile, even after Israel, kind of the kingdom of Israel dissipates. Okay, so that's, again, basically 1500 BC all the way to 400 BC, between that waiting period before Jesus Christ comes back. And so these different verses are happening at all different times. And actually, really, the first 18 are the time of mostly David. And so it kind of goes back and forth. And so you may get confused a little bit. But just know that these are times where people, influential people, leaders, some anonymous and some that we know of, specifically David, are ones that the Lord had appointed as leaders to carry out his overall vision for his people. So just know that. And then one thing that I do want to touch on is that, we always talk about how we're made in the image of God, right? So usually we think about that as our, physical bodies, but we're made in God's emotional intelligence and intellect too. So a lot of times we forget about that. And so this is the cool thing about the Psalms, is that we get to come to the Lord with our emotions. When we use the word emotions, we think dramatic. We think, man, I'm just an emotional person. There's nothing wrong with that. That's the cool thing about the Lord, is he's saying, bring that to my table, right? So you'll see a lot of raw emotion, a lot of hard things that are said. And the cool thing is we get to respond the same way when we bring it to the Lord. And so today we're going to be actually diving into a particular psalm in beginning stages in chapter 4. So everyone flip your Bibles over to chapter 4. So I had Sarah read Psalm 3. And so Psalm 3 and 4 are actually a psalm from David. Okay, David is writing this out. And most of us don't really know that unless we go back in the history of Israel. And so in 2 Samuel, David is, he's the king over Israel and Judah. And his son, his very own son, Absalom, is actually trying to overthrow him in his kingdom in this time. And so David and several others are fleeing away to really find refuge. And so he's writing this psalm in a cave. Okay? And so just picture yourself in a cave. We all have moments where we want to hide in a cave, or we're seeking that refuge in a place that just is foreign to us, right? And so this is where David is at. And if you can imagine having your own son, your own birthright, betray you and try to overthrow you, man, that's heavy stuff, right? That can be very chaotic. Let's open up to Psalm 4. Answer me when I call, O God of my righteousness. You have given me relief when I was in distress. Be gracious to me and hear my prayer. O man, how long shall my honor be turned into shame? How long will you love vain words and seek after lies? But know that the Lord has set apart the godly for himself. The Lord hears when I call to him. Be angry and do not sin. Ponder in your own hearts on your beds and be silent. Offer right sacrifices and put your trust in the Lord. There are many who say, who will show us some good. Lift up the light of your face upon us, O Lord. You have put more joy in my heart than they have when their grain and wine abound. In peace I will both lie down and sleep. For you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety. All right, so again, this is a psalm by David with his people in the cave. Chapter 3 is what they would consider a morning psalm. Okay, so in the morning, that's when he wrote it, and then in chapter 4, something he wrote at night. So again, he's continually reminding himself of God's goodness. I mean, morning and night, right? And most of the time, we actually don't even recognize that. When we wake up in the morning, we should be coming to the Lord with goodness. We should also at night be coming to the Lord and seeing His goodness. So one thing that you probably saw in that chapter 9 is there's this saying called Selah, right? Or Selah, or whatever you want to call it. Everyone, again, argues about what the real meaning of that is. But one thing we can all agree upon is it's saying, stop for a moment and think about that. Okay, so when we read through something that says Selah, so when we're reading the Psalms this week, we should stop and really meditate on that. And if you say, man, I just don't know if I have time to stop and meditate, we really got to go back and really say, hey, let's take our time in this. Let's really reflect on what the Lord is doing in our hearts at that time. Morning or evening, whenever you read it, stop and think what the Lord is trying to communicate to you. Okay? So now we all are on Psalm 4. Okay? If you don't have a Bible open or you're not sharing with someone, get one, grab one, look at it, because we're going to go through this. And what this is going to do for us as a church is it's really going to explain the posture that the Lord is asking us to have in times of trial or in good moments. This is a posture that David had decided to take from his experience in the cave. And that's how he did it actually with his people. So, first thing to notice is in verse 1, chapter 4, answer me when I call you, O God of my righteousness. You have given me relief when I was in distress. Be gracious to me and hear my prayer. O man, how long shall my honor be turned into shame? How long will you love vain words and seek after lies? Selah. Okay, so stop and think for a moment. David is actually really talking about a characteristic that far too often we forget. He's running to God. Now, when we get in distress or trials, we typically run away from God. I'm not even talking about running to something else. We don't see God in this place that He's someone that we should run to, that we should depend on. And one thing to note here is David, although his throne is kind of being overrun at the very moment, David was not worried about his position. Okay, he wasn't worried about the kingdom not being his. He was worried because he knew his son Absalom was not righteous before the Lord. And he knew that would thwart or destroy or ruin the plans of the Lord. So he's bringing it to him, right? He understands. He's saying, man, I wish my son was righteous. I wish he was, but actually, he's everything but that. He's being selfish. He's obviously very narcissistic, and he has some evil plans for his own pleasure, right? To have that kingdom. And so David is not taking a position of running to God for his own benefit, but for the benefit of people in that kingdom. And so he runs to the Lord, and he says, Lord, I know you have a plan. I'm going to reach out to you, and I need you. And so, again, we ask the question, what kind of posture should we take when it comes to our trials? And a lot of us come from different places of pain, and also suffering, and also good things, triumph, and mountaintop experiences. But that doesn't change our posture in worship, right? It doesn't change who we should really run to. It only solidifies it that running after God is key. Okay, verse 3. But know that the Lord has set apart the godly for himself. The Lord hears when I call to him. Okay? And when I was reading through this, I was like, man, what is David trying to talk about here? And basically, he's talking about where his true identity lies, right? So he relies on a constant that I can run to the Lord at any time because my identity is made in him. And here's the thing, right? Is we could, again, you always hear the conversation saying, well, what does your identity really lay upon? Is it your spouse or your kids or your career or your reputation? Which are all great things. But that is, not the right identity. But the problem is that our identity usually gets replaced with those things. And then we run into trials. It's usually that identifying piece that's shaken, that's broken. And then we wonder why it's so hard to get past that when our identity has been in something that's about to be faulty, that's not about to have a strong foundation. Right? So, and all those things are true, right? We should be We find pleasure in our family. We find pleasure in our jobs. We find pleasure in the things that matter to us. Those are important things. But they are not the key identifier to how we should walk with the Lord. And so David's talking about that. He's saying, man, I have all these great things, all these riches, and right now I'm here in a cave. And my identity is found in the Lord that hears me when I cry out to him. Now, when we go to the verse 4, we're going to spend a little bit of time here. And again, this is just a quick synopsis, but again, we run to God, we find our true identity in God, not those other things that we think identify us, right? And here's one other thing too, right? The trial that we run into is our circumstance, good or bad. We're not identified by that either. So a lot of times we identify ourselves with these things that make us feel special and great, and then they're faulty. So that's one thing. But also in the trial, we say, man, this circumstance is what defines me. My triumph, my trial, my good and bad experience, those things are not the ones that hurt us. And so we have to realign our identity. Our identity is in the God that takes care of us. And I mean, again, we're talking about a man here that has to run from his palace to his cave, right? So he's sitting in riches. He's got guards that protect him, and now he's sitting in a cave that probably isn't very comfortable. I don't know any of you, but I've never sat in a cave more than like 20 seconds, or I get a little scared and everything. So I mean, it's just mind-boggling to think of the attitude that we have, that the Lord calls us with, which we don't act in, especially in today's culture. Okay, verse 4. Be angry and do not sin. Ponder in your own hearts on your beds and be silent. Selah. Okay, so stop and think for a moment. We've run to God. We've aligned our identity. And now, David's literally saying, I got to examine my own heart. What happens a lot of times when we go through trials? We kind of get scared, we get distracted, actually our vision, when that trial comes, right, it's like we're blinded by everything. We're blinded by our own anger, we're blinded by our own selfish ambition, and we forget to even question our own heart in that trial or that suffering. And we can get blinded by that. And so when we're in the middle of it, we really just kind of ignore it. But there's a quote by Warren Wiersbe, and if you ever are interested in doing a study in Psalms and spending some time in your daily devotion, Warren Wiersbe, man, he kind of kills it. He basically has written 8 different books, which are very similar devotionals on the Psalms, and he talks about the heart of every problem is really the problem in the heart, right? And so that's where he always suggests that we begin. Before we even find our identity or before we even run to God, and sometimes asking the question, okay, what's going on in my heart here that makes me angry about this? Or that, makes me worry or have anxiety about this? What's the problem in my heart? So when we find that alignment, we run to God, we got to examine that. And that's what David said. Be angry and do not sin. Ponder in your own hearts on your beds and be silent. So there's 2 things that we can do when we are blinded, right? When we're tempted to do things. And here's a typical word, right? I do not like what's happening right now. God, I can't believe you have me in this place. God, I can't believe that this is on my plate. And you notice that David's actually, he's actually acknowledging that he's angry. He's upset. I mean, wouldn't we all be angry if our own children turned on us and wanted to ruin everything? And so there's nothing wrong with the anger other than how we respond to it. So we become passive. We become sometimes not even close to passive. We just kind of sit there and let it sit inside us. And we just get angry about it. We don't talk to anyone about it. We don't express it. So here's the thing. From that anger, 2 things can come from it. Either righteousness comes from it, which David is trying to be an example of, is that I want to seek righteousness, or we allow Satan to take that and we allow him to create sin. And that could be walking in sin in it, or just letting it fester in. Eventually, we won't really have that identity. We won't run to God. We'll be lost. And that happens, right? I bet for the most of us, we sit there and we say, man, that's where I am right now. And then there's another thing that we can do with that kind of anger, is that we react to it, and then secondarily, we create other things, again, other identities to how we handle that problem. So if we didn't recognize that identity already, we're going to go to the second identity, and we're just going to create more and more and more and more. And a lot of times we do that in our own busyness, right? We want to put it under the rug, and I'll deal with it when everything kind of comes into place. And here's the thing, God is saying, don't deal with it later, deal with it now. I mean, we're talking about a guy that is sitting in a cave, and he's saying, I want to deal with this with you, Lord, now. And that's the other part of patience, is that when we deal with it with the Lord, sometimes it doesn't happen instantaneously. It takes some time. And so David is, again, just giving us an idea of pain, like giving us a window of how we can respond to times of trial. You know, and I look at my own self. This morning, my son, I was preparing, I was getting ready for church this morning, and, he really upset me because he came out of the bathroom and basically decided that he wanted to become a puppy and pee on the floor. And I was like, really, dude? And I wanted to be so angry. I really did. I wanted to be so mad. And, but I'm reading right through this. So, I was just struggling with that same thing. And that's not even a trial. It's silly, right? It's silliness that those type of things, can control us so easily. And so then we talk about serious matters. Man, you're walking into some really tough stuff. And so how we go about not approaching the Lord, and how we just ignore the importance of that, is so dangerous. Verse 5, you're going to flip over there. Offer right sacrifices and put your trust in the Lord. Now, here's the interesting thing, right? So he's talking about how he examines his own heart. He says, okay, I've identified where my issue is, and I'm going to lay that before the Lord. I'm going to ask him to take that. I'm going to forgive me of it. Forgive whoever else in it. And now, the cool stuff starts to happen. You know what David is doing there? He's actually turning his heart towards worship. Okay, now, worship can be really tough, right? Because I've actually had some recent conversation with people that, I visit them at their homes, or I give them a phone call, and they say, man, I can't even imagine stepping foot inside this sanctuary today because I'm so angry, or I'm in so much pain. I don't even find joy in that. And that can be really hard. Especially when someone else is next to you and they're like, oh, God is so good. You're like, man, you don't even know what's going on in my heart right now. But this is the thing, the Lord does, right? The Lord understands your pain. And how sweet is it? How great is it that we don't just come to God when he benefits us, but we come to God because he's God. And we've kind of lost that, right? We see where, we're so emotional. We have so many things we say, man, I only approach God when things are good. But you still have to approach him in those other ways, where you're running to him, you're identifying with him, you're examining your heart, and you worship him, regardless of your circumstance, because those things don't identify you. Right? And so we have to continue to run to him. And don't get me wrong, man, pain is so hard to deal with sometimes. Sometimes it's so numbing. We can't be here. But I know that some of you came through these doors this morning with that numbness, with that pain, with that trial. And, regardless if it's your child peeing on the floor, or if it's, a huge thing where you're like, man, I've just been dealing with this for years, that it's overcome me, the Lord wants you to bring it. But in worship, in God and who he says he is. He says, I'm worshiping you because you're my Father, because you provided for me everlasting. And although he knows, right, he knows that his son is about to experience some great pain himself, right? He knows that the Lord will redeem the situation and deliver him. And there's things of patience in that, but we got to recognize that when we come to the Lord, that we trust that he will deliver us from whatever that may be. But it's not always exactly how we see it either. Someone's trial is not going to be the same trial as mine. And someone's outcome maybe of the same trial is not going to be the same outcome as mine. Because that's not the way the Lord has designed it, but we like to think that way. How come they got this and I didn't get this? I didn't get this, this friend that came and supported me, or I didn't get this, package in the mail because someone did something else. Like, we always want to compare, but the Lord says, man, you have me. You have me. It doesn't matter what you've gotten out here. You have me, and I'm going to deliver you. That is the tough part when it comes to this relationship, right, with the Lord, is that I use the word relationship, and you may even say, what does that mean? I would say it's being transparent and genuine and honest. Sometimes we use words that we didn't even know we had in our minds. But the Lord wants that, and he wants us to deal with it appropriately, righteously. I think we've all seen, over Facebook and all these stupid blog posts all over the place about ISIS and Syrian refugees, and we know the appropriate and inappropriate responses. And truly, as Christians, we should be walking in appropriate responses, saying, man, Lord, this is way bigger than me. This is way bigger than some words on a computer, right? Man, like, I don't even know how we got there, but it's just, we got to go back to the root, right? To the roots, to those traditions that we talk about. And I'm super excited because over the next 16 weeks, including today, Adam and Matt and Johnny and Sam and everyone will be coming up here just explaining what the Lord is doing in their heart, that we can all celebrate together. And sometimes that's tough. And sometimes that will be really good. But we want to do it together as a family, and we have to start as a church or as an individual, start to recognize, where are we running to? Because our identity, again, is not even in Aletheia. It's in the Lord. Now, let's go to verse 6. There are many who say, who will show us some good? Lift up the light of your face upon us, O Lord. Lift up the light of your face upon us. Okay, look, so here's David's next response, right? So, just to recap, we've run to God, we've kind of aligned our identity in God, we've examined our hearts, okay, and then, I can't even remember the last one because I just read it, and of course that's how it happens. We turn to him in worship, we say, regardless of what happens, I'm coming to you because you are my Father. You're the one that takes care of me. And then the next one is that David, although he's in deep sorrow and kind of really deep suffering, he knows that he's called to minister to these people that he's with in the cave. So he doesn't just sit there and sulk in his own problems. He starts to say, you know what? Here's the answer that we have. And it's that I'm going to ask the Lord to show up for everyone here. And you look at me today, right? Like I've gone to seminary, I've studied all these textbooks, done all these things, but I'm not here to tell you something profound or theological or give you a doctrinal dissertation. It's talking about how, man, we just need to approach that throne and ask the Lord to show up, to bring that light, right? Lift up the light of your face upon us, O Lord. That means he's asking, we want to see you. We want to see you. Now that's an interesting thing, right? Because in the text in Psalms 4, it was talking about in the Hebrew, it wasn't just, we want to see you. It was like a true deep calling, like crying out like, God, I have to see you, or I won't make it. Have we thought about like the way we cry out? Like, is it, God, it'd be good if you showed up someday and I'll be ready. Or, is it a deep passionate understanding, like this is who you need. We need to see you. And he starts to minister people through that, saying, man, I don't really know what to tell you. You know where I'm at because I'm the king of Israel, and I know that you guys feel for me, but I understand you're suffering through your own thing. So I'm actually gonna bring you in here, and I'm gonna say, man, we want to find the Lord together. Right? We want to find the Lord together. We want him to show up. And so he's asking God, please be tender, loving, and kind enough to shine your face upon us. That's a crazy posture. Actually, that's even a really tough thing to say sometimes. God, just shine your face upon us. I mean, that's an illustration. But that's the posture that the Lord has asked us to take. So again, I mean, the trials that we run into can sometimes fog our vision, but when we start to say, man, Lord, like, I gotta find you through the thick and thin. So good things or bad, like, I want to see your face. Think about this, okay? Now, the last part, and so we'll look at verse 7 and 8. Is, you have put more joy in my heart than I have when their grain and wine abound. Let's stop there for a second. So when their wine and grain abound, I mean, he's saying when I have everything, and I mean, when I'm just sitting there and I'm living it up and I'm laughing with my friends and I'm sitting in this palace, you know, I have more joy in my heart now than I did then. It's tough to find that joy unless we do those other things. Okay, he's finding joy in his grief. And sometimes, again, that numbness, the pain, all those things, I mean, that keeps us from finding that joy. So don't get me wrong, I don't think, you know, if Manny said, hey, go find that joy, then like I know exactly where that is, but I know that the Lord does. Right? I can't tell you what that is for you. But I can tell you that it's not in the things that the world tells us to find joy in, right? So verse 7, you have put more joy in my heart than you have when their grain and wine abound. And then verse 8, in peace I will both lie down and sleep for you alone, O Lord. Make me dwell in your safety. Okay, so again, David is sitting in this cave and he's saying, God, I have found this peace. I have found this joy more than I ever did when I was sitting in this palace, sitting under that protection. Because that's not what makes me yours. In peace I will both lie down and sleep. Again, he wrote this at night, so he's saying, he's writing this down saying, like, God, I need some rest tonight. My rest is in you and what you did for me. And he's saying, I will praise you and I will sleep good tonight because I know who you are. Now here's the question, right? Do we know who God is? Do we understand his promises? Do we understand? How do we know that we know the Lord? And for me, it's always saying, man, I gotta go reflect on that in the scriptures. And so in the Psalms, when we're reading through, you're going to see all the time where David is, or someone else is saying, man, Lord, I delight in your word because it's the only thing that sustains me. Lord, I delight being with your people because they're the only ones that sustain me. And so the only place that we can find that joy is if we, one, put ourselves in a community of people that are pursuing the same thing, and also we pursue the word that is talking about the same thing, right? So how can we always come to the Lord and say, man, Lord, you haven't done this, you haven't done that, and then we don't even recognize the importance of running after him and seeking that joy. And that's different for every person. But it's because the Lord has loved us so much that we can even do that. And read 7 and 8 again. You have put more joy in my heart than they have when their grain and wine abound. In peace I will both lie down and sleep. For you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety. Or in another word, you make me dwell in your refuge. Now, do I have any Walking Dead fans in this place? Okay, right on. Cool. All right, so what are they trying to find? Like, why the heck are they running around and doing all these things? They're trying to find refuge. I mean, they're out there and they just, I mean, again, I know it's a crazy show. Some of you are like, I can't believe Manny watches that show. And I'm going ahead. You can talk to me about that later. But the thing is they're trying to find refuge. Almost every show is trying to show you, on TV is trying to show you where you're supposed to find that refuge, right? Safety in whatever the world says. But the Lord is saying you find safety, you find refuge in me. Right? Even when you're sitting in a cave. And some of us have those cave moments, right? Some of us have those mountaintop experiences. Some of us have those exposing moments. I actually like to call them the naked moments when you're like, dang it, I just don't want to be in front of anybody. I don't think David really chose a cave by choice. And sometimes we put ourselves in that circumstance when we unfortunately put ourselves in the cave by choice. And then sometimes we don't find those mountaintop moments were by choice, but they come and we're like, man, God, you're so good. But we can't come to the Lord only in those mountaintop experiences. And I think that's why, I mean, I've worked in youth ministry for many years, right? And, when you go on a retreat, you find Jesus, and you're like all excited, you're so pumped, and then 2 weeks later, you don't know what hit you, and you're like, man, I don't know if I believe in the Lord anymore. Man, that's just Satan jumping on top of those things and taking advantage of the things that happen to us intellectually and emotionally. We got to go back to that root of saying, man, I want to find refuge in who God says He is. And that takes time, right? Not instant results. If we had instant results, I don't think we'd be sitting in this room right now. If we had gratification in the things of this world, we wouldn't be meeting today. Now, some of you may say, Manny, you don't even know the extent of my pain. You're silly coming up here and it's nonsense that you're telling me that I need to seek refuge and I got to do this and do all that. I'm not telling you all these things that you should do. I'm saying these are the things that the Lord has asked us to do. Because regardless of our circumstance, He's walking with us in love. He's walking with us as a church. He's walking with us as individuals. And sometimes it just takes a wake-up call. And to let you know, right, David wasn't the most perfect person ever. I mean, he was an adulterer, and on top of his adultery, he murdered someone. Also, he was very selfish many times. I mean, he even raised sons that want to overthrow him in his kingdom. And that means a lot to a lot of men here, right? Husbands and fathers, of what their sons do represent who they are. Which, is granted is fair, but that's the tough part, is that sometimes they don't always go in the direction we want or desire. The Lord is saying, those things are faulty. You need to come to me. So, and here's what I want to do for a moment, is I want us just to take a minute in silence and just think, what does it look like to seek refuge in the Lord this morning? Not what Manny says, okay? Not what I would desire for you, because I could be wrong, but what does it look like? What is the Lord telling you this morning on how to seek refuge? I'm going to invite the worship team to come up. So here's a couple things, right? So I was studying through the Psalms for a few weeks and other things, but Francis Schaeffer says this, that the Psalms are a narrative of what God's grace does in the heart of everyone who seeks Him. Okay, and so when we sit up here, people kind of get mad. I'm tired of that paper phone. I'm sorry. Stupid. Anyway, so when people get mad, right? When we get up on the pulpit and we say, "Go after God," people get insulted sometimes. They're like, "What do you mean? I'm just going to go after this guy?" I'm like, "Well, yeah, that's what faith is that we walk out our faith and we seek a God that sometimes is hard to kind of understand and grasp. I mean, that's what faith is, right?" And so when people kind of get mad and frustrated with the fact that we tell them to seek after God, Most of the time they blame it on the pastor, or they blame it on another friend that told them to do that, but they never bring it to the Lord. Okay? So during this time of worship, I'm challenging all of us to bring these things to the Lord, because He has some awesome promises for us, because He's what? He's our Father. Regardless if any person out there doesn't believe that Christ exists or that God exists, He's still your Father. It really, I mean, that's the tough part, right? Is you could stare at me blue in the face and you could be mad at me, but why wouldn't I want to guide you to your dad? Why wouldn't I want to guide you to the one that has promised to keep and hold you, where you can find refuge, where you can find safety? You know, and so when we're reading these Psalms this week, and the next week, and the next week, and the next week, which is going to be awesome, we really need to entrench ourselves in just that truth of, we're going to find so many truths of who God says He is. You know, and it's not about these authors that show awesome faithfulness, right? It's actually to tell us about who God is and that He's worthy of our praise. And so when we worship this morning, and you're sitting there, you may just say, I don't know if I'm ready for this. Some of you may be ready to seek after refuge. But don't let your circumstance, don't let your reputation, don't let those things that you identify yourselves in, help you realign. Don't let those things keep you from realigning who you are in God, who your true daddy is, who your true father is. So during this time of worship, I would just encourage you just to seek refuge. And I would even say, if you just had an awesome week where you're like, dude, I had the best time ever, that's where we can start really humbling ourselves, right? That where we can actually start laying truth before the Lord, because one day that trial will come and you'll say, I know who my God is. You won't have to worry about that. And then some of us will have to come back and say, man, I got to realign myself. I got to adjust my heart. Now, Psalms is a funny thing, because this is where a lot of churches, a lot of denominations, a lot of people actually get their theology or doctrine of worship, on how we should worship and how we should do things, because David wrote it in some type of system, or because someone else wrote it in some type of system. And the realization is that it doesn't matter, how we worship, because I think all that God cares about is a pure heart. Okay? The Lord cares about our heart. And so I would just ask this morning that we would come and we ask the Lord, man, to pure our heart. And if you have a question about what that means to have a pure heart, I'd love to talk to you about that. But would you all just stand up and just join me and the worship team as we seek refuge in the Lord?